He grabbed her by the collar and threw her into the washing machine. The metal edge caught her shoulder blade. She hit the floor on one knee, both hands flat on the linoleum. Nobody moved. Cody Marsh stepped over her laundry basket, picked her phone up off the floor, and put it in his jacket pocket without looking at her. One motion. No hesitation. The kind of thing a man does when he has done it before and found it effective. Ruth Callahan was on the floor of her own building. 9 years she had owned this place. 9 years of 6 a.m. opens and midnight closes, and mopping this exact floor until her shoulders ached. 2 kids at home. Nobody else coming. She turned her head toward the back corner. The red mop bucket. 4 steps. Maybe 5. She had to get there. She had to flip it upside down. 3 weeks ago, a man in a worn flannel shirt had pointed at that bucket and said 7 words she hadn't expected to need. Tonight, she needed them. This is Heart Tales. Here's the full story. Cody Marsh didn't yell. That was the thing about him. That had always been the thing about him. He stood in the center of Ruth's laundromat at 11:43 at night and spoke at a volume just above the hum of the machines, the tone of a man explaining something to someone who should already understand it. "You know what your problem is?" Ruth stayed on the floor. Her shoulder pulsed where it had caught the machine, and she breathed through it, slowly, the way she had learned to breathe through things that hurt, without letting the hurt show on her face. "Your problem," Cody said, "is you think this is a negotiation." He walked to the folding counter, picked up her last customer's laundry bag, and moved it to the floor beside the door. Not throwing it, just relocating it, the way you move an object that is in the way of something more important. 4 men had come in with him. 2 stood near the front entrance. 1 leaned against the folding counter. The 4th watched the parking lot through the plate glass window, hands loose at his sides, face turned away from the room. They had done this before. Ruth could see it in how they stood. Not tense, not excited, just arranged. The way furniture gets arranged when someone has already decided how the room should look. This was the 4th time Cody Marsh had used her building. The first 3 times, Ruth had gone home. She had told herself it was practical. She had told herself it was temporary. She had told herself a lot of things in the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station 2 blocks away while she sat in her car at midnight waiting for a text that said they were gone. Tonight, she had locked the back room door before they arrived. She wasn't entirely sure, even now, why she had done it. She had stood at that door with the key already in the lock, and something in her had made a decision that her brain was still catching up to. 9 years. Every machine. Every pipe that burst in February. Every Christmas Eve she came in alone because a family needed clean clothes for the morning. Not tonight. Cody reached into his jacket and pulled out her phone. Set it face down on the folding counter. 40 minutes, he said. That's all this ever is. You can stand there or you can sit down. I don't have a preference. But the back room opens and you stay in here. And in 40 minutes we're gone and this didn't happen. Ruth got to her feet. Her knee ached where it had hit the floor and she didn't let herself favor it. Cody watched her stand up with the expression of a man watching something mildly interesting. "Smart," he said. "Stay on your feet. That's better for everyone." One of the men near the door said something low to the other. Cody turned his head a quarter inch toward the sound. 1 second, maybe 2. Ruth walked. Not fast. Fast would pull eyes. She moved the way she always moved in this building at the end of a shift. Purposeful, unhurried. A woman crossing her own floor because that is what you do in a place you have mopped 10,000 times. You move through it like you own it. Because you do. 3 steps toward the supply shelf along the back wall. The red mop bucket sat beside the utility shelf exactly where it always sat. Handle facing out. Upright. Standard issue. Rubbermaid. 18 liters. The kind of bucket every cleaning supply wholesaler in Montana stocks by the pallet. Ruth had 6 of them, color-coded by zone, red for the back half of the floor. She had never thought about any of them twice, until 3 weeks ago, on a Wednesday night, when a man she had only just met pointed at this specific one and said something she hadn't expected anyone to ever say to her. 4 steps. She reached it, looked down at it. It weighed nothing. Empty plastic, a handle worn smooth from years of use. She gripped it, flipped it, set it down upside down on the linoleum without a sound, And then she kept walking, past it, past the shelf, reaching for a bottle of surface cleaner with the same motion she had used every night for 9 years, as if that were where she had been going all along, as if this were just the end of a shift, as if nothing had changed. Cody was looking at his phone. He had already looked away. In the back corner of the room, last row of machines, folding chair against the wall, hat pulled low, Gene Pruitt had not looked away. He had been sitting in that chair for 51 minutes. One load in machine 7, whites. He had a paperback in his lap that he had not opened once. He saw the bucket. He didn't move. He looked at it for 3 seconds. The way you look at something when you need to be absolutely certain you are seeing what you think you're seeing, and then he looked at the man standing in the center of the room, then at the door, then at the 2 men in front of it. His right hand found his phone in his jacket pocket. He did not take it out, not yet, because Gene Pruitt had made a promise to a woman 3 weeks ago, on a Wednesday night, that smelled like coconut fabric softener and machine grease, and a promise meant you didn't move until you were certain, until you had counted the room, until you knew exactly what you were walking into and had already decided how it ended. He had counted the room. He had decided. He was waiting for one more thing. Cody Marsh crossed the floor toward the back room door. He tried the handle. Locked. He stood there for a moment, hand on the handle, head slightly down, with the stillness of a man recalculating. Then he turned around, and for the first time since they had walked in, he looked all the way to the back of the room, at the man in the folding chair, at the hat pulled low, at the hands resting on the paperback, completely still. Cody's eyes stayed there for 2 seconds longer than they should have. "Who's that?" he said. Not to Ruth, to the room. Nobody answered. To understand why that question mattered, to understand what Gene Pruitt was doing in that chair on a Saturday night, and why Ruth Callahan had flipped a red mop bucket instead of a light switch, and why Cody Marsh's voice had dropped half a register when he asked it. This story doesn't start here. It starts 9 years ago, on the day Ruth Callahan signed a lease on a broken-down coin laundry on the east side of Billings, Montana, and decided that was enough to build a life on. 9 years ago, Ruth Callahan signed a lease on a building that smelled like mildew and machine oil, and broken ambition. The previous owner had run it for 11 years, then let it go when the coin mechanisms started jamming and the cost of replacing the dryer drums outpaced what the quarters were bringing in. He sold everything, the machines, the signage, the supply closet full of cleaning products nobody had touched since the previous decade, for $22,000, and Ruth paid it with money she had borrowed from her mother and her mother's sister, and a credit union in Billings that gave her a rate she didn't fully understand until the 3rd month. She named it Copper Basin Laundry. The name didn't mean anything specific. She had just needed something that sounded like it belonged on the east side of town, and that sounded like it would still be there in 10 years. She was 30 years old, divorced 8 months. Tyler was 5. Dana was 2. The building was on Grant Avenue, 11 blocks from the house she had grown up in, which she found either meaningful or irrelevant, depending on the day. 3,040 square feet of concrete floor, and fluorescent light, and 24 washing machines, 12 dryers, and 1 broken change machine. She fixed herself with a YouTube tutorial and a flathead screwdriver at 2 in the morning. She was good at fixing things. She had learned this about herself in the last year of her marriage, and found it was true in ways that extended beyond plumbing. The first year was the hardest. Not because of the money, though the money was precise and unforgiving in ways she had not anticipated, but because of the hours. Open at 6, close at midnight, 7 days a week for the first 8 months, because she couldn't afford part-time help, and the math only worked if she was the one doing every shift. Her mother watched Tyler and Dana on weeknights. Ruth drove home after closing, kissed 2 sleeping foreheads in the dark, and was back before either of them woke up. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself a lot of things that year. What she didn't tell herself, what she refused to let herself think about between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning, when the building was quiet and the machines were running their last loads, was that she might fail. Failure existed in her peripheral vision the way a debt notice exists on a kitchen table you walk past every day without opening. She knew it was there. She had made a deliberate choice not to look directly at it. By the end of year 2, She had hired 2 part-time employees and repaired every machine that needed repairing, and replaced the broken change machine with a card reader. By year 3, she had regulars. People who came in at the same time every week, who she knew by name, who knew which machine ran a little hot and which dryer needed an extra 6 minutes. She knew the rhythm of the place the way you know the rhythm of a living thing. Machine 7 was slow to fill. The neon sign out front flickered when the temperature dropped below 15 degrees. The back drain backed up every February without fail. She had mopped this floor more times than she could count. She had come in on Christmas Eve because a pipe leaked and a family needed clean clothes for the morning. She had stayed past closing because a woman with a baby fell asleep in one of the chairs, and Ruth didn't have the heart to wake her. This was her building. Every screw, every tile, every stubborn stain on the linoleum that would not come clean, no matter what she used. That was the thing Cody Marsh had never understood. Stay with me, because this is where it starts. Not with Cody walking in, but with the Tuesday afternoon, 7 months ago, when he first walked in, and Ruth thought he was just another customer. He came in at 4:17 in the afternoon, on a Tuesday in April. Cody Marsh was 31 years old, and built like someone who ran more than he ate. Lean in the shoulders, sharp in the jaw, the kind of thin that looked deliberate. He wore a black jacket with no logo, and clean white sneakers, and carried 1 duffel bag of laundry. He used machine 14. He didn't talk to anyone. He paid with a card. He was unremarkable in every way that mattered. Ruth noticed him the way she noticed every new customer, cataloged him without staring, filed the details away the way you file things when your job is to be aware of who is in your building at all times. Black jacket, clean shoes, 1 bag, no phone out. He came back the following Tuesday, same time. Machine 14 again. The 3rd Tuesday, he asked if the back room was available to rent for storage. "We don't do storage," Ruth said. "Temporary," he said. "Few hours. I'll pay for the inconvenience." He put $800 in cash on the folding counter. Not fanned out, not presented. Just set there, flat, like it was a business card. Ruth looked at it. Then at him. $800 was a Thursday and a Friday combined, on a good week. "A few hours," she said. "That's all it ever is," he said. She took the money. She told herself it was a one-time arrangement. She told herself she didn't need to know what was in the duffel bags he moved through the back room that evening, because the back room was locked and the laundromat was busy, and by 9 o'clock, he and 2 other men she had never seen before were gone, and the room was empty and clean, and $800 was sitting in her register. She drove home, kissed 2 sleeping foreheads, told herself it was a one-time arrangement. It happened again 6 weeks later. Then again 5 weeks after that. The second time, there were 4 men instead of 2. The third time, Cody arrived first, and the others came in 15 minutes later, and Ruth noticed the way they positioned themselves in the building, one near the door, one at the back, without being asked, without speaking to each other, like men rehearsing choreography they had learned somewhere else. She didn't say anything. She served the other customers. She mopped. She thought about the $800 each time, and she thought about Tyler's school field trip to Yellowstone that she had almost not been able to pay for, and she told herself that Cody Marsh was not her problem, that whatever he moved through her back room was not her concern, that people made arrangements like this all the time and nobody got hurt. She believed this for 3 months. The first time she understood what she had agreed to was a Thursday evening in September. A woman named Carol Briggs came into the laundromat at 7:43. With 2 trash bags of laundry, and a bruise along her left jaw she was doing a poor job of hiding. Carol was 44, worked the overnight shift at a grocery distribution center, and had been coming to Copper Basin for 6 years. Ruth knew her name, knew she took machine 4 because it was closest to the outlet, and she always brought her phone charger. Carol set her bags down, looked up, and stopped. 2 of Cody's men were leaning against the folding counter in the back, not doing anything. Just leaning, the way men lean when they want to take up space without technically doing anything wrong. Carol picked up her bags. Ruth watched her walk back out the door. She stood behind the counter for a long time after that. She thought about Carol driving home with 2 bags of dirty laundry, because the place she had been coming to for 6 years no longer felt safe. She thought about what it meant that Carol had known, immediately, by looking at two men leaning against a counter, that she should leave. She thought about what Carol knew about the world that made that instinct so fast and so accurate. She thought about what it meant that she, Ruth, had made the arrangement that put those men there. She didn't call Cody. She told herself there was nothing to call about. She told herself Carol might just have been having a bad night. But the next time Cody texted, a Thursday, the code they had worked out, just the word tonight, Ruth didn't respond for 2 hours. Then, she responded. Because the field trip money was gone, and the back drain needed a plumber, and the math was the same math it had always been. The second incident that shifted something in her happened in October. A man named Dennis Waite came in while Cody's crew was using the back room. Dennis was 67, retired, came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always used machines 2 and 3 simultaneously, because he had a system. He walked in, looked at the two men near the door, looked at Ruth, and said quietly, "You need me to stay?" Ruth said, "No, I'm fine." He stayed for 40 minutes anyway. Folded his laundry very slowly. Left only when Cody's people left. He never mentioned it again. Neither did she. But she thought about it on the drive home. She thought about an old man in a windbreaker deciding, on his own, without being asked, that his presence might matter. She thought about the weight of that, what it cost him, what it would have cost her to say yes. She had said no, because she didn't know, yet, how to say yes. The third incident was not an incident. It was a night. A Wednesday night in November, 3 weeks before tonight. A man she didn't recognize came in with 1 bag of laundry and sat in the folding chair in the back corner and didn't open the paperback he brought with him. And everything that came after began there. Jean Pruitt came in at 10:41 on a Wednesday night in November with 1 load of laundry in a canvas bag, and no particular reason anyone in the room would have looked twice at him. He was 58 years old, 6 feet 1, 195 pounds distributed across shoulders and forearms in a way that suggested a life spent doing physical things without ever having thought of them as exercise. His hair was gray, cut short. His beard was salt and pepper and trimmed without precision. He wore a flannel shirt the color of a dark river, faded at both elbows, and jeans that had been washed enough times that the denim had gone soft. His boots were brown, and had covered enough ground that the leather had creased along the exact shape of his feet. He wore a cut over the flannel shirt, black leather, worn at the collar. The patch on the back was large and centered. An iron compass rose, the north point replaced by a tongue of flame, 2 rockers curving beneath it. The top rocker read, "Iron Compass Mech." The bottom rocker read, "Montana." He set his bag in front of machine 7, looked at the instruction panel for a moment, and loaded his laundry. Ruth was at the folding counter sorting the last of a commercial order, a cleaning service downtown that dropped off twice a week. She noted the new face, noted the vest, noted that he moved through her building the way certain men move through spaces, not claiming the room, not deferring to it either, just present. He put coins in the slot, settled into the folding chair in the back corner, opened a paperback. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look at her. Ruth finished the commercial order, logged it, started mopping the front half of the floor. For the next 20 minutes, the room was quiet except for the machines. He spoke first, not to her directly, more to the general air of the room, the way someone observes weather. "That one runs a little hot." Ruth looked up. He was looking at machine 11, which was running someone else's load. "Number 11, she said. "Yeah, 20 degrees over. I have a repair guy coming Thursday." He nodded. She kept mopping. He kept reading. 5 minutes later, he said, "You do this shift alone every night?" "Most nights." "How long's the building been yours?" 9 years. He looked up from the paperback at that. "Just briefly. The way you look at someone when a number lands differently than you expected. That's a long time to build something," he said. Ruth wrung out the mop. "It's a long time to do anything." She didn't know why she answered the way she did. There was something in the way he asked. Not curious exactly, more like a man who already understood the weight of the question and was asking anyway, out of respect for the answer. She went back to mopping. He went back to the paperback. At 11:15, his machine finished. He moved to a dryer, transferred the load, set the timer. On his way back to the chair, He stopped at the supply shelf along the back wall, looked at the row of mop buckets without touching them. 6 of them, color-coded, handles out. He pointed at the red one. "If anything ever happens when I'm here," he said, "flip that one upside down. I'll see it." Ruth stopped. She was holding the mop handle with both hands, and she stood completely still for a moment. The way you stand when someone says something that doesn't fit any category you have for the things people say. "That a standard offer you make to people?" she said. "No." "Then why me?" He looked at her for a moment before he answered, not sizing her up, something more like recognition. The look of a man who has seen a specific kind of weight on a person before and knows what it means. "I've driven past your lot twice this week," he said. "Both times after 11. There was a truck parked out front, angled across the exit. Different plates each time, same driver." Ruth said nothing. "I'm not asking what that means," he said. "That's your business. I'm just saying, if it ever means something you didn't plan for, flip the bucket. I'll see it." She looked at the red bucket. Rubbermaid, 18 liters, handle worn smooth. She had owned it for 7 years and never thought about it once. She looked back at him. "You come here Wednesdays?" she said. "Wednesdays and Saturdays. Kakui. Kakui. Last shift." He said it in the easy way of someone who has arranged their life around specific hours for reasons that are their own. Ruth thought about Carol Briggs walking back out the door with 2 bags of laundry. She thought about Dennis Waite folding his shirts very slowly for 40 minutes. She thought about the truck angled across her exit at 11:15 on a Tuesday, and the way she had sat in her car in the parking lot 2 blocks away at midnight, watching her phone, telling herself everything was fine. "Okay," she said. "Just that. One word." He nodded once and went back to his chair. She thought about it on the drive home that night. She turned it over in her mind, the way you turn over something small and dense, trying to find the angle that lets you see through it. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he did or what the Iron Compass MC was, or what it meant that he had noticed the truck twice. She knew only what he had told her, which was almost nothing, and what he had offered, which was so specific that she couldn't make it fit any framework she had for how strangers behaved. She had worked a register, a laundry counter, a front desk, and a folding station for the better part of a decade. She had learned to read people the way you learn to read weather, not by studying it, but by being outside in it enough times that your body starts to know before your brain does. She could tell the difference between a man being friendly and a man deciding whether to be a problem. She could tell the difference between someone who wanted something and someone who was just present. This man had been just present, and he had noticed the truck. She thought about the red bucket. She thought about what it would mean to flip it, to make the decision in advance, before the moment required her to decide, to have a word already spoken, an agreement already made, so that when the moment came, her hands would know what to do even if her brain was too full of other things. She thought about Lorraine. She didn't know about Lorraine yet. She wouldn't know about Lorraine for weeks. But she thought about whatever it was in this man that had made him look at her building twice in 1 week and decide that an old plastic bucket was worth pointing at. She thought about what a person has to have seen to think that way. She went home, kissed 2 sleeping foreheads, stood in the kitchen for a while without turning the light on. The next Saturday, she looked for him. He came in at 10:53, machine 7 again, paperback, hat pulled low. He didn't speak to her. She didn't speak to him. But when she did her last sweep of the back half of the floor that night, the part of the routine she could do with her eyes closed, she found herself noting, without meaning to, exactly how many steps it was from the utility shelf to where she would be standing if she needed to cross the room without drawing attention. 4 steps, maybe 5. She wasn't planning anything. She was just counting. The Saturday that changed everything started like every other Saturday. Ruth opened Copper Basin at 6 in the morning. She turned on the fluorescent lights in order. Front panel, middle panel, back panel. The way she had turned them on 2,073 times before. She unlocked the coin machines. She checked machine 7 for the slow fill valve she had asked the repair guy to look at twice without result. She filled the detergent dispensers at the courtesy counter. By 7:15, she had 3 customers. By 9, she had 11. The Saturday rhythm of Copper Basin was different from the weekday rhythm. More families, more laundry per load, more time spent waiting, because people brought enough to fill 2 machines and had nothing to do in between. Ruth knew this rhythm the way she knew the rhythm of her own breathing. She moved through it without thinking, refilling, checking, answering questions about which cycle to use for wool, making change, writing down the number for the repair guy on a sticky note she already knew she would lose. Tyler texted at 10:47, "Can I go to Marcus's after school Monday?" She texted back, "Yes, home by 7. Dana texted at 11:12, "Mom, there's no milk." She texted back, "I'll get it tonight." These were the coordinates of a Saturday. Small, specific, dependable. The kind of day that asked nothing from you beyond your attention and your legs. She did not think about Cody Marsh until 2:17 in the afternoon, when his truck pulled into her lot. He didn't come in. He sat in the truck for 4 minutes. She clocked it against the machine timer on the wall, and then he drove away. Ruth stood at the folding counter and watched him go, and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized but could not name. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation of a calculation completing. The feeling of an equation you've been running in the background for months, finally arriving at its answer. She had been telling herself that the arrangement was temporary. She had been telling herself that she had control over it, that she could end it whenever she chose, that the $800 3 times was a decision she had made freely and could unmake the same way. Standing at that counter watching Cody's truck disappear onto Grant Avenue at 2:17 in the afternoon, she understood that she had been wrong about all of it. He hadn't come in because he didn't need to. He had come to confirm that she was here, to establish, without words, that Saturday night was still on, that the arrangement was continuing whether she had renewed it or not. She thought about Carol Briggs. She thought about 2 trash bags of laundry, and a bruise along the left jaw, and a woman deciding in 3 seconds that the room was wrong and leaving. She thought about what Carol had known that Ruth had spent 7 months trying not to know. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She did not call the police. She had thought about calling the police after the second time, and she had turned the thought over for 2 weeks before setting it aside. 3 men carrying duffel bags through a back room was not a crime she could prove. $800 in cash on a counter was not a crime at all. And Cody Marsh, who had never raised his voice in her building, who had never touched her or threatened her, or done anything she could point to and name, Cody Marsh would walk out of a police station in 4 hours and drive past her building on the way home. She knew this with the certainty of a woman who had spent 9 years learning how things actually worked. She put her phone in her apron pocket. She thought about the red bucket. Think about what you would have done. Standing at that counter, phone in both hands, with a bucket 4 steps away that someone had pointed at 3 weeks ago. How many of us would have remembered it was there? At 6:41, while Ruth was running the last commercial order of the day through machine 4, her phone rang. It was her sister, Diane, calling from Missoula. They talked for 11 minutes. Nothing urgent, nothing particular. The kind of conversation that exists because the people having it have been talking their whole lives, and the absence of something to say has never been a reason to stop. Diane asked about Tyler's science project. Ruth asked about Diane's new apartment. Diane said the landlord still hadn't fixed the heat. Ruth said to document everything in writing. She was about to hang up when Diane said, "You sound tired." Ruth looked at the back of the room, at the supply shelf, at the red bucket standing upright beside the utility shelf, handle facing out. "I'm okay," she said. "You always say that." "I know." After she hung up, she stood still for a moment with the phone in both hands. She thought about Diane saying, "You sound tired," with the particular gentleness of someone who knows you well enough to know that what you are describing as tiredness is something else, and who loves you enough not to push. She thought about what she would say if she called back. She thought about the words she would need, and whether she had them, and whether it would matter if she did. She put the phone back in her pocket. She thought about the red bucket. She did not let herself think about it too directly. The way you do not look directly at something you are deciding whether to reach for. She went about the rest of her shift the way she always went about it. Transferred loads. Cleaned the folding counter. Did a circuit of the machines with the surface spray. Started on the floor. At 10:22, Gene Pruitt walked in. She heard the bell above the door before she saw him. She was mopping the middle section of the floor, back to the entrance, and she turned and saw the black cut first. The iron compass patch centered between his shoulders. The flame at the top of the compass rose, the Montana rocker beneath. Then the flannel shirt. Then the canvas bag over one shoulder and the paperback in the other hand. He went to machine 7 without looking at her. Same machine. Same deliberate choice. She watched him load his laundry for a moment, then went back to mopping. She told herself she was not relieved to see him. She told herself the sensation moving through her chest when the bell above the door rang and she turned and saw the patch was simply recognition. Oh, it's him. And nothing more weighted than that. She was a practical woman. She had been practical her entire adult life out of necessity, and had come to regard it as a virtue. She did not lean on people. She did not build arrangements around the availability of others. She had spent 9 years making certain that nothing about Copper Basin Laundry depended on anything she could not control herself. She mopped the floor. Gene Pruitt sat in his chair and did not open the paperback and did not look at his phone. At 10:58, Cody Marsh's truck pulled into the lot. She saw the headlights through the plate glass window first. The angle of the light. The way it swept across the machines as the truck turned in. The particular motion she had learned to recognize across 7 months of watching it happen, and telling herself it didn't mean what it meant. She stopped mopping. She counted the lights that followed. 1 vehicle. Then a second. Then 2 more behind it. 4 vehicles total. She had never counted 4 before. 3 was the most it had been. She looked at Gene Pruitt. He was already looking at the window. His face gave her nothing. No alarm, no movement, no change in his posture at all. He sat in the folding chair with the paperback in his lap, and he looked at the parking lot through the plate glass with the expression of a man observing weather. Not weather that surprised him. Weather he had been watching form for a while. He turned his head, looked at her, looked at the back of the room. Then he looked at the door. Cody Marsh walked in 43 seconds later. What happened in the next 6 minutes is something Ruth Callahan has thought about many times since. She has thought about the moment she picked up the laundry basket and Cody knocked it from her hands. She has thought about the back room door she had locked at 10:30, the key now sitting in her apron pocket against her phone. She has thought about the weight of Cody's hand on her collar, and the specific distance between her feet and the floor for the 2 seconds she was in the air before the machine caught her shoulder and the linoleum caught her knee. She has thought about all of it, but the part she comes back to most often is the 4 steps. Because here is what nobody in that room understood, except Ruth Callahan. She had already decided, not in the moment Cody walked in, not when he knocked the basket from her hands, not even when she hit the floor. She had decided at 6:41 that evening, standing at the folding counter with her phone in both hands after her sister said, "You sound tired," when she looked at the red bucket and understood that the reason she kept not looking directly at it was because she already knew she was going to use it. She had spent 4 months counting the steps to that bucket during her nightly sweep of the floor. She had never admitted to herself that she was counting them. She had called it routine. She had called it habit. It was neither. She got up off the floor with her knee aching and her shoulder pulsing, and Cody Marsh standing 8 feet away, and she walked. Not fast, not slow. The walk of a woman in her own building, doing what women do at the end of a long shift, in a place they have mopped 10,000 times. 3 steps. She could smell the coconut fabric softener from machine 3, the one the Saturday regulars always used. She could feel the linoleum through the soles of her shoes, slightly gritty with the fine dust that accumulated no matter how often she swept. She could hear Cody's voice behind her, something low, something about the room, something she registered and set aside because her attention was entirely on the distance remaining. 1 more step. Her hand found the handle, worn smooth. Plastic, 18 liters, 7 years of use. The weight of it nothing. She gripped it, flipped it, set it down without a sound, upside down on the linoleum, in the exact center of the back half of the floor, exactly where a woman would set a bucket she had just moved while going about her business at the end of a shift. She kept walking, surface cleaner from the shelf. Same motion as 10,000 other nights. Cody looked away. In the back corner, Gene Pruitt looked at the bucket. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Cody Marsh in the center of the room, at the 2 men near the front door, at the one watching the lot through the glass, at the 4th by the folding counter. His thumb found his phone in his jacket pocket. He pressed 2 buttons. The call lasted 4 seconds. 3 words spoken. Copper Basin. Now. 1 word answered. He put the phone back in his pocket. He did not stand up. He settled back into the folding chair and looked at Cody Marsh. Really looked. The way you look at something when you are deciding how a situation ends and you have already decided. And he waited. 17 minutes. That was how long it took. Ruth Callahan was standing at the supply shelf with a bottle of surface cleaner she had no intention of using when she felt it before she heard it. A vibration in the floor. Low. Rhythmic. The kind of sensation that enters through the soles of your feet before your ears register what it is. Then the sound. Not loud at first. A low rumble from the direction of Grant Avenue. The kind of sound that could be a truck downshifting, or a train on distant tracks, or something else entirely. Growing steadily, filling the space between the machines and the ceiling and the plate glass windows. The man watching the parking lot turned from the glass. He said something. Nobody answered him. The rumble became a roar, and then the headlights came. The man watching the parking lot took 1 step back from the glass. Just 1. He didn't know he had done it. The headlights kept coming. Not in a line, fanned out across Grant Avenue, filling both lanes and the shoulder, the way a wave fills a shoreline not by arriving at one point, but by arriving everywhere at once. The sound had reached the level where it was no longer something you heard with your ears. It moved through the plate glass, through the linoleum, through the steel frames of the washing machines. 23 motorcycles. They came in from the east and from the west simultaneously. 2 columns that met in front of Copper Basin Laundry and stopped without signal, without formation, without anyone appearing to have planned it. They just stopped. Engines idling. Headlights on, pointed at the building. Not one rider dismounted. They sat on their machines in the cold November air, and they did not move, and they did not speak, and the engines ran. Ruth Callahan heard it from the supply shelf where she was standing, with a bottle of surface cleaner she had forgotten she was holding. The sound entered her through the floor first, that low, rhythmic vibration she had felt 17 minutes ago, building into something that had no comparison in her previous experience. She turned. Through the plate glass she could see the lights. She had to breathe through what she felt when she saw them. She pressed her palm flat against the supply shelf and breathed through it the way she had breathed through the machine edge, catching her shoulder, and the linoleum catching her knee. And when she was done breathing through it, she straightened up and looked at Cody Marsh. Cody was looking at the window. His face had not changed exactly. The controlled, conversational expression was still there, technically, but something beneath it had. The way a structure looks the same right up until the moment it doesn't. "Who called someone?" he said. The room didn't answer. He said it again, slower. "Who called someone?" The man near the front door shifted his weight. The one at the folding counter moved his hand to his jacket pocket and then stopped. The one who had been watching the lot was still 1 step back from the glass, staring at the line of headlights, and he had gone very still in the way of a man whose body has made a decision his brain hasn't caught up to yet. Cody turned to look at the back corner, at the man in the folding chair, at the paperback still closed in his lap, at the hands resting on top of it, completely motionless. Gene Pruitt met his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just looked at Cody Marsh across the length of Ruth's laundromat, the way a man looks at something he has already made peace with. Cody moved toward him. Slowly. The particular slowness of a man who needs to be seen moving slowly, who needs the room to understand that he is not afraid, and that his pace is a choice. He stopped 6 feet away. "That your crew out there?" Gene said nothing. "I asked you a question." Gene looked at him for a moment. Then, with the unhurried motion of a man who has nowhere to be, he set the paperback on the seat of the chair beside him and stood up. He was taller than Cody had estimated. Not dramatically. An inch, maybe 2. But in the particular way that height lands differently when it belongs to a man who has been sitting quietly in a corner for an hour and you have not been factoring him into your calculations. The flannel shirt. The worn jeans. The boots that had crossed more ground than Cody Marsh had lived years. And the cut. Cody's eyes went to the patch on the back of the cut. He couldn't help it. The same way you can't help looking at something that your instincts tell you to understand before anything else. Iron Compass MC. The compass rose with the flame at the north point. The Montana rocker. He looked at it for 2 seconds. Looked back at Gene's face. Something moved behind Cody's eyes, not recognition exactly. More like the beginning of a realization that was going to keep arriving for a while. "You're not from around here," Cody said. "Born in Laurel," Jean said. 45 minutes east. His voice was the same voice Ruth had heard 6 weeks ago on a Wednesday night. Easy, unhurried. The voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that volume was not the same thing as weight. "This is a private arrangement," Cody said, "between me and the owner. You're a customer. This doesn't involve you." "Okay," Jean said. He didn't move. Cody waited for something else. There was nothing else. "I'm going to need you to sit back down," Cody said. "No," Jean said. One word. Flat. Not hostile. Not a challenge. Just a fact, stated with the certainty of a man reporting on the temperature outside. This is the moment Cody Marsh should have read the room. He had built everything he had on the ability to read a room. That was the skill, not the product, not the logistics, not the network. The skill was knowing, before anyone else did, when a situation was going to go a different way than planned, and adjusting early enough that the adjustment looked like a choice, rather than a retreat. He had always been good at it. He looked at Gene Pruitt, at the stillness of him, at the hands loose at his sides, at the way he occupied space without filling it, the way men fill it when they want to be seen. And he reached a conclusion that was wrong in the specific way that conclusions are wrong when you are applying the right framework to the wrong kind of person. He thought, this man is bluffing. He thought, the crew outside is a show, leverage, the move of someone who has called in a favor to create pressure that they cannot actually apply, because if they could apply it, they would have already. He thought, this is manageable. He reached into his jacket, took out the knife, not fast, not threatening, not yet, just present. The blade 4 inches, held at his side, the way you hold something to establish what is available rather than to use it. "I'm not interested in a situation," Cody said. "I'm interested in 40 minutes. After 40 minutes, we go. The room is clean. You go back to your laundry. She goes back to her building. Nobody needs to know anything happened here." Gene looked at the knife, looked at Cody's face, looked at the knife again. When he looked back up, something had shifted in his expression. Not fear, not calculation either. More like the settling of a decision that had been pending. Gene looked at the knife. He looked at it for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Cody's face. Not the knife, not the door, not the men behind him. Just Cody's face. The way a man looks at something when he has already decided what it is, and is simply confirming. He reached into his jacket pocket. Cody took half a step back, instinct, pure and fast, before he could stop it. Gene took out his phone, pressed one button, held it to his ear for 2 seconds. Put it back in his pocket, looked at Cody. 30 seconds, he said. Cody heard it before he understood what he was hearing. The engines outside changed pitch, not louder, different. The sound of machines shifting from idle to something with intention behind it. And then a sound underneath it, from the direction of the back of the building, the service alley that ran along the east wall of Copper Basin Laundry, the alley with the loading dock and the dumpsters, and the door that connected to the back room. A door, then boots on concrete. Then the interior door from the back room opened, and 2 men walked into the laundromat. They wore cuts identical to Gene's. They didn't speak. They positioned themselves, one near the folding counter, one near the east wall, with the same practiced ease as Cody's own people positioning themselves had looked when they came in. Except these 2 did not look at Ruth, did not look at Cody's men, looked only at Gene Pruitt, waiting. Cody's man near the front door took another step back. This time he knew he did it. "Hey," Cody said to him. The man didn't answer. Cody looked at the one by the folding counter. That one had gone very still, watching the 2 men from the back room with the expression of a person doing math they don't like the answer to. Cody looked at the one at the back wall, who was supposed to be between the exit and the room. That one had his hands visible, at his sides, not reaching for anything. 4 men. He had come in with 4 men. 4 men who had, in the last 90 seconds, quietly and without coordination, stopped being available to him. Not because of anything Gene Pruitt had said, not because of any threat or instruction or show of force. They had not been overpowered. They had not been outmaneuvered in any way they could have pointed to and named. They had simply looked at a 58-year-old man standing in a laundromat in a worn flannel shirt, and at two men who had come through a back door without hurrying, and at 23 motorcycles on Grant Avenue with their headlights on, and their bodies had arrived at the same conclusion independently. The room had changed while they were standing in it, and the person in this room who understood how it had changed was not Cody Marsh. Cody felt it happen. He could see it on their faces, not fear of Gene specifically, not fear of the patch or the crew outside, something more precise than that. The fear of a man who has just understood that he walked into a room he did not understand, into a situation that had dimensions he had not measured, and that the person standing calmly 6 feet away from him had measured all of them well in advance. He looked at Gene. Gene stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing and waited. "This is a misunderstanding," Cody said. "Is it?" Not a question. 2 words, flat and patient. "I have an arrangement with her." She agreed to it. "Ruth," Gene said, without taking his eyes off Cody. "Did you agree to this?" Ruth Callahan was standing at the supply shelf. She had been standing there for the last 4 minutes with a bottle of surface cleaner in one hand and her other hand flat against the shelf, and she looked at Cody Marsh, at his face, at the knife still in his hand, at the particular expression of a man who has run every calculation he knows how to run, and found that none of them apply, and she said, "No." 1 word. Cody looked at her, then at Gene, then at the knife in his own hand, which he seemed to register as if noticing it for the first time in the last 30 seconds. Gene took 1 step toward him. "Put that away," he said, "and then you're going to tell me where the back room key is." He said it the way you say something that is already true, not a command, a description of what was about to happen. Cody Marsh stood in the center of Ruth Callahan's laundromat with a knife in his hand and 3 men who had stopped being his in the room, and 23 motorcycles on the street outside, and a 58-year-old man 1 step closer than he had been. And for the first time in this building, for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what came next. He looked at his 4 men one more time. He looked at their faces. What he saw there, in each of them, separately, independently, was something he had never seen directed at him before. They were not looking at Gene. They were looking at Cody. And what was on their faces was not the expression of men waiting to be told what to do. It was the expression of men who had already decided they were going to do nothing. Who had looked at the full shape of the situation, at the back room door, and the 2 iron compass men, and the row of headlights through the glass, and the specific way Gene Pruitt was standing, and had concluded, quietly, without conference, that Cody Marsh had walked them into something none of them had been prepared for, and that the decision to be here had been his, and that whatever came next was going to be his too. Cody lowered the knife. He put it in his jacket pocket. He reached into his other pocket. He set a key on the folding counter. Gene Pruitt picked up the key. He didn't look at it. He looked at Cody Marsh for a moment. The long, settled look of a man who has finished 1 calculation and is beginning another. And then he handed the key to Ruth without turning his head away from Cody. Ruth took it. Her hand was steady. She noticed this with the detached observation of someone monitoring their own body from a short distance. She had expected her hands to shake. They didn't. They had stopped shaking sometime in the last 4 minutes, and she wasn't certain when. She walked to the back room door, unlocked it, opened it wide. The duffel bags were stacked against the far wall, 3 of them, dark canvas, zipped. Behind her industrial dryers, exactly where they always were. She looked at them for a moment the way you look at something you have been pretending is not there, now that you have finally stopped pretending. She walked back out, left the door open. Gene looked at Cody. "Your people are going to carry those out," he said, "through the front. You're going to put them in your truck, and you're going to drive away from this building, and you're not going to come back." Cody said nothing for a moment. "And if I don't?" "You will," Gene said. "No threat attached to it. No inventory of consequences. No description of what happened if the answer was wrong. Just the flat certainty of a man who had counted the room correctly, and knew that Cody had counted it incorrectly, and that this difference between them was the only thing that mattered now." Cody looked at his 4 men. They were already moving. Not because Gene had told them to, not because Cody had told them to. They moved because they had spent the last 8 minutes arriving at the same understanding that Cody was still working through. And they had arrived there faster, and they had decided that the fastest way out of a room you should never have entered was the front door, at a walk, without looking at anyone. One by one, they went to the back room. One by one, they came out carrying duffel bags. The man who had been watching the parking lot went first. The one from the folding counter went second. The third went without being asked. The fourth, the one who had been near the east wall, the one who had gone still when the iron compass men came through the back door, carried 2 bags because there were 3 bags and 4 men, and the math of the situation required someone to carry 2. Nobody spoke. The front door opened. Cold November air came in for the 7 seconds it took each man to pass through. The door swung shut, opened again, swung shut. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after Gene Pruitt said "you will," the back room was empty. Cody Marsh was the last one standing in the laundromat. He stood in the center of the floor, Ruth's floor, the floor she had mopped 10,000 times, and he looked at Gene, and he looked at the 2 iron compass men by the east wall, and he looked at Ruth, and he seemed, for a moment, to be doing something that did not come naturally to him. He was trying to find the version of events in which this had gone differently. Ruth had seen that expression before, not on Cody specifically, but on the face of the particular kind of person Cody was, the kind who builds entire architectures of justification around their choices and lives inside those architectures so completely that when the architecture fails, the failure doesn't feel like a consequence. It feels like an injustice. She could see him working through it. She could see him deciding that the truck parked across the exit had been reasonable, that $800 3 times was a contract she had entered freely, that tonight was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a failure of someone else's clarity rather than a result of his own choices arriving at their natural destination. She thought about Carol Briggs. She thought, "I know. I understand how you get there. I spent 7 months getting there myself." She did not say any of this. Cody looked at Gene one more time. "This isn't finished," he said. Gene said nothing. "You don't know who I work with." Gene said nothing. Cody waited for a response, for some acknowledgement that the threat had landed, for the expression of a man who was reconsidering. Gene Pruitt's expression did not change. He stood in the same posture he had stood in for the last 12 minutes, hands loose, weight distributed, completely still. And he looked at Cody Marsh with the patient attention of a man who has seen this exact moment before and knows exactly how long it lasts. It lasts until the person talking runs out of things to say. Cody ran out of things to say. He walked to the door, pushed it open. The cold came in for the last time. He was 3 steps onto the sidewalk when he stopped. Through the plate glass, Ruth watched him stop. He was looking at Grant Avenue. At the 23 motorcycles still idling in both lanes, headlights on, engines running. At the riders sitting on their machines in the November cold, not moving, not speaking. Watching him walk out of a building they had come to because one man had pressed 2 buttons on a phone and said 3 words. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. Ruth would think about that moment later, about what Cody Marsh saw when he looked at those 23 machines. She thought he probably saw what he was supposed to see, the force of it, the numbers, the specific weight of being the man walking out of the building, rather than the man who called. But she thought he might have also seen something else, something she suspected he had not anticipated seeing when he drove to Copper Basin Laundry that evening, with 4 men and 3 duffel bags and an arrangement he had decided was a contract. He saw 23 people who had come because one person asked, not because they were paid, not because they were threatened, not because they had anything to gain from sitting on cold motorcycles on a November street at 11:30 at night, because Gene Pruitt had pressed 2 buttons and said 3 words, and that had been enough. Cody had spent his entire adult life building a system in which loyalty was a transaction. You paid for it, or you threatened it out of someone, or you made yourself indispensable enough that walking away cost more than staying. He had believed, without ever putting it into words, that this was how it worked, that this was how it had always worked. He stood on that sidewalk and looked at 23 people who were there for none of those reasons, and understood, not with anger, not yet, but with the particular cold clarity of a man watching a wall he built fall down, that he had been wrong about something fundamental, that there was a currency he had never earned and didn't know how to earn, and that the man standing in Ruth Callahan's laundromat with a worn paperback and a canvas bag of laundry had more of it than Cody would accumulate in a lifetime of $800 arrangements. Cody got in his truck. He drove away. The engines outside went quiet in sequence. Not all at once, but one by one, like lights being turned off in a building at the end of a night. The headlights followed. The street went dark. By 11:53, Grant Avenue looked exactly the way it looked every other night. Gene Pruitt's two men left through the back. No goodbyes, no ceremony. Gene himself crossed to Machine 7, transferred his whites to Dryer 4, and set the timer for 32 minutes. He sat back down in the folding chair. He picked up the paperback. Ruth stood in the center of her laundromat for a moment, in the particular silence that follows the end of something large, and she did not know what to do with her hands. She put the surface cleaner back on the shelf. She picked up the mop. She looked at the mop and then set it back against the wall. She walked to the folding counter and put both palms flat on the surface and stood there until her breathing was what it was supposed to be. Then she said, "You knew about Lorraine before you came in here, didn't you?" Gene didn't look up from the paperback. "My sister," he said. 2009, Laurel. Ruth said nothing. "Nobody was there when she needed someone there," he said. "I was 80 miles away and I got there 40 minutes too late, and she was fine. Fine meaning alive. Fine meaning the damage was the kind that doesn't show, and I have thought about those 40 minutes every day for 15 years. He turned a page. Whether he was reading it was unclear. "The bucket wasn't for you specifically," he said. "I do it whenever I see a situation that has that shape. A woman, alone, a building at the end of a night, something in the lot, or the way she moves, that tells me the room is wrong." "How many times have you done it?" 11, he said. "Before tonight." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Who else?" "A gas station attendant in Missoula, a front desk clerk at a motel outside Bozeman, a woman who ran a bait shop alone on the Yellowstone River Road." He paused. "Different buildings, different signals. A light switch left in the down position. A cup moved to the left side of a counter. A door stopper in a hallway." Ruth looked at the red bucket. It was still upside down in the center of the back half of the floor, exactly where she had set it. She walked to it, picked it up, turned it right side up, set it back beside the utility shelf, handle facing out. "Did any of the others ever use it?" "No," Gene said. She stood there for a moment. "Then why did you keep doing it?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because the 12th time," he said, "might be the time it mattered." The dryer timer went off at 12:24. Gene folded his laundry at the counter. The particular careful folding of someone who has done it alone for a long time and has developed a system. T-shirts in thirds. Socks matched and rolled. He moved through it without hurry. Ruth was mopping the front half of the floor, the part she always saved for last. She said, "I need to call someone. About tonight." "Yes," he said. "I don't know if it'll do anything." "It might not," he said, "but you'll have said it. And saying it goes somewhere, even when it feels like it doesn't." He folded the last shirt, zipped the canvas bag. He carried it to the door, stopped with his hand on the push bar. "You've been building something here for 9 years, he said. "That's not nothing. That's not close to nothing." He pushed the door open. The cold came in one more time. He was gone before she thought of anything to say back. 3 weeks later, Cody Marsh was arrested at a storage facility in Yellowstone County on charges of possession with intent to distribute and aggravated assault related to a separate incident in October. 2 of the 4 men who had been in Copper Basin Laundry that night gave statements to the Billings Police Department. In their statements, they described a delivery arrangement that had operated across 4 locations on the east side of the city over 14 months. They described a laundromat on Grant Avenue. They described a woman who had been assaulted on the premises. They did not mention the man in the folding chair. They described him only as an older man who was doing laundry. Ruth Callahan gave her own statement the morning after. It took 2 hours. The detective, a woman named Sandra Oakes who had a cup of coffee going cold on the desk between them the entire time, listened without interruption and wrote everything down and said, at the end, "I want you to know that what you did tonight, locking that back room, that's what gave us somewhere to start." Ruth drove home at 8:17 in the morning. She kissed 2 sleeping foreheads. Dana stirred and asked if she was okay. She said yes. Dana went back to sleep. Ruth stood in the kitchen for a while without turning the light on. She thought about the bucket. She thought about Carol Briggs. She thought about 11 other women in 11 other buildings across Montana and Wyoming who had never needed to flip anything, and whether any of them had ever stood at the end of a shift in a quiet building and felt, the way she felt it now, that the room had someone in it who was paying attention. She thought it probably mattered, even when it had never been used, especially then. 6 months later, on a Wednesday evening in May, Carol Briggs came back to Copper Basin Laundry. She came in at 7:40, the same time she always had, with 2 laundry bags and her phone charger. She set up at machine 4. She didn't say anything about the months she had been going elsewhere. Ruth didn't ask. At 8:15, a woman Ruth didn't recognize came in. Younger, mid-20s, Ruth guessed. She wore a jacket with the collar turned up, despite the warmth, and moved through the room with the particular careful attention of someone who has recently learned to measure spaces before entering them. She loaded a machine, sat down. She looked around the room the way you look around a room when what you are actually doing is making sure you know where everything is. Ruth watched her for a moment from behind the counter. Then she crossed to the supply shelf. She moved the red bucket 18 inches to the left, into the center of the back half of the floor, where it was clearly visible from the seating area, where someone sitting in the chairs along the wall would be able to see it without looking past anything. She went back to the counter. She didn't say anything to the young woman. She didn't need to. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be there. 5 men walked into that laundromat, believing the only people who mattered in a room were the ones willing to use force. Jean Pruitt had learned, a long time ago, that the people most willing to use force are usually the ones who've never met anyone truly capable of it. There is a particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a raised voice or a clenched jaw, or the specific posture of a man who needs the room to know he is not afraid. It looks, from the outside, like a man reading a paperback in a folding chair. It looks like a woman crossing her own floor at the end of a long shift, moving the way she has always moved, because she has decided, quietly, without witness, in the space between one breath and the next, that tonight is the night the calculation changes. Ruth Callahan spent 7 months believing that enduring something was the same as managing it, that calculating the odds was the same as having options, that keeping 2 children safe by staying quiet was a kind of protection rather than a kind of cost. She was not wrong. She was surviving in the way that people survive, by making the best choice available inside the constraints they can see. The mistake was not in her math. The mistake was in believing that the constraints she could see were all the constraints that existed. Jean Pruitt's presence in that building did not change the room. He did not add force to a room that lacked it. He did not arrive with something that hadn't been there before. What he added was a door that Ruth didn't know was there. That is all any of us can offer each other, in the end. Not rescue, not certainty, not the guarantee that things will resolve cleanly or quickly or without cost. Just the knowledge that the room has more dimensions than the ones currently visible, that the door you cannot see may be 4 steps to your left, and that someone in the corner has already counted them, and that if you need to find it, they will see you looking. He had done this 11 times before. Different buildings, different signals, different women calculating different odds in different rooms on different nights, across 15 years of Montana and Wyoming highways. Not one of them had needed it, until Ruth. But Jean Pruitt had kept showing up on Wednesday nights and Saturday nights, kept loading his laundry into machine 7, kept sitting in the folding chair with an unread paperback, because he understood something that most people spend their whole lives not understanding. The value of a door is not diminished by the fact that it was never opened. It is enough for it to exist. It is enough for someone to know it is there. It is enough. Ruth Callahan still opens Copper Basin Laundry at 6 in the morning and closes it at midnight. The neon sign still flickers when the temperature drops below 15 degrees. Machine 7 still fills a little slow. The back drain still backs up every February. Some things don't change because a night went differently than expected. But some things do. Carol Briggs comes back on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Dennis Waite still uses machines 2 and 3 simultaneously because he has a system. The young woman who came in on that Wednesday evening in May has been back 4 times since. Ruth doesn't know her name yet. She will. The red mop bucket sits in the center of the back half of the floor now, not against the wall, not tucked beside the shelf where it went unnoticed for 7 years. In the center. Visible from every chair. Right side up. For now. If you or someone you know is experiencing coercive control, intimidation, or domestic abuse, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-799-7233. Free. Confidential. Available by call or text. You do not have to be certain. You only have to reach. If something in this story stayed with you, a moment, a decision, something you can't quite name, leave it in the comments. I read every one. If you're new here, this is Heart Tales. Subscribe and stay. There's always another story worth hearing. 2 more are waiting for you on screen right now.